My world shattered the moment I saw them, those damning photos and messages that proved my husband's betrayal, like a slap across my face. I stared at the screen, unblinking, as the cache of intimate images and explicit texts kept loading, one after another. Rex and Jenna, my husband and my daughter-in-law. Bile rose in my throat as the truth sank in. How could they? Rex had grown distant lately, blaming work stress and extra hours for his sudden coldness. But this crossed every line imaginable. The bathroom door opened and Rex strode out, towel around his waist. "Hey, honey, what's wrong?" His familiar crooked smile froze when he noticed the laptop screen. I wheeled around, fists clenched. "You lying son of a bitch!" His eyes widened in shock before clouding with guilt. "Marlene, I can explain." "Explain what?" I spat. "How you've been screwing our daughter-in-law behind all our backs? How you made me believe your excuses while disgracing our family?" Rex shook his head vigorously. "It's not like that." "Oh, save it." I grabbed my phone and started recording, needing evidence. The photos, the messages, it's all right here, plain as day. He blanched and raised his hands in surrender. "Marlene, please, put the phone down and let me explain." "Explain?" I recoiled in disgust. "No, Rex. Actions speak louder than words, and your actions have made it abundantly clear." Taking a steadying breath, I met his gaze with cold finality. "We're done." The oppressive silence that followed was broken by his defeated sigh. "Okay, I deserve that." My finger hovered over the stop button, but something made me... Rex looked utterly ashamed, like a little boy caught misbehaving. And despite it all, part of me still craved answers. "Just tell me one thing," I said, jaw clenched. "Why her? Why my sweet Jenna?" His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. It just happened. We got closer after you introduced her into the company. One thing led to another, and you betrayed everything," I exploded. "Our marriage, our family's trust, all for what? A cheap thrill?" Rex shook his head miserably. "No, baby, it wasn't like that." "Don't you dare baby me." I closed the laptop lid with a sharp thwack, cutting off Jenna's leering face. "I want a divorce, and I'm telling Max everything." "No, Marlene, please." He rushed forward, grabbing my arm. "Give me a chance to make this right." I jerked free from his grasp, seething. "You had your chance, Rex. Many chances, in fact. But now?" I glared at the pitiful, desperate man before me, a shadow of the confident husband I once admired. Now it's too late. Despite the shock and humiliation, I somehow maintained my composure over the next few days. I went about my routine like nothing earth-shattering had happened, cooking, cleaning, tending to the house. On the surface, our family life appeared perfectly normal, but it was all a facade. Beneath the veneer of domestic bliss, an invisible storm raged within me. My mind kept replaying those vile images, torturing me with every smile Rex flashed, every time Jenna batted her innocent eyes. How could they be so calm and collected, carrying on like their lives hadn't been upended by their sordid betrayal? I decided to watch them closely during our scheduled family dinner that week. We all gathered around the table, Rex, Jenna, Max, and I, forcing fake jovial chatter. I studied my husband and daughter-in-law, scrutinizing their every move for even a hint of guilt or the slightest slip-up to confirm my suspicions. They didn't disappoint. While loading her plate, Jenna accidentally brushed against Rex, their bodies lingering just a beat too long. A silent look passed between them, heated and heavy with unspoken meaning. My blood boiled. "Something wrong, Mom?" Max's concerned voice pulled me back to the present. I realized my fork was clenched in a white-knuckled grip. "Just lost in thought, dear." I released my death grip on the utensil with an exhale. "So, Jenna, how's the new job treating you?" She looked almost relieved at the distraction. "It's going great, thanks for asking." Her sugary tone was sickening. "Rex has been such a big help getting me settled in." I caught the subtle wink she shot my husband and saw red. So that's their game, carrying on shamelessly right under our noses. I opened my mouth to unleash my fury, but Max spoke first. "I'm really proud of you two," he said warmly, oblivious to the tension. "Who would have thought you'd hit it off so well after Mom brought you on?" Rex draped an arm possessively around Jenna's shoulders. "Well, you know what they say. Like families, like employees." They shared a sickening laugh at the inside joke. Bile rose in my throat at their audacity, their brazenness. My hands shook with suppressed rage. "You must be very proud too, Marlene," Jenna cooed, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Having your husband as a mentor to help advance my career." A sly, knowing smirk curled her lips, revealing the vicious instigator beneath the veneer of kindness. In that moment, all the pain and humiliation bubbled over into white-hot fury. I'd been a fool to ever trust this venomous snake. My chair screeched backward as I shot to my feet, causing the table to erupt into chaos. Plates clattered and utensils scattered across the tablecloth. But I didn't care. I was done being civil, done gritting my teeth and taking their disrespect. It was time for the gloves to come off. "Listen here, you manipulative little bitch," I snarled, venom dripping from every word. Jenna's painted smile collapsed in shock. Max's eyes widened to saucers. Only Rex looked unsurprised, almost resigned. My lips curled into a ferocious sneer as I leaned across the table, glaring daggers at the woman who betrayed me. "I know exactly what kind of pride you've given my husband." The silence that followed my outburst was deafening. Max looked shell-shocked, gaping between his wife and father like a gasping fish. "Mom, what are you saying?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Before I could respond, Jenna recovered from her surprise with an indignant huff. "Marlene, I think you owe me an apology." Her tone was pure ice. Those accusations were completely uncalled for. The nerve of this woman. I rounded on her, eyes blazing. "An apology? You've got to be joking." I shook my head in disgust. "I'll give you one chance to come clean for Max's sake." She held my stare, utterly defiant. When she spoke, her voice was low and laced with quiet menace. "You don't want to start something you can't finish, Marlene." A tremor of unease rippled through me at her veiled threat. This wasn't the sweet, innocent girl I'd welcomed into my home. This was a cold, calculating viper. Rex finally found his voice, gripping the table with white knuckles. "Ladies, please, let's all take a step back and stay out of this." I cut him off with a slice of my hand. Turning back to Jenna, I leveled her with my most withering glare. "I gave you a chance to do the right thing, but if you won't confess, I'll show Max myself." For the first time, a flicker of fear passed through her eyes. You don't have any proof, don't I?" I allowed myself a grim smile before reaching into my pocket and pulling out my phone. "You two should be more careful about where you leave your little mementos." Her bravado crumbled at the implication. "You? How did you?" I scrolled through the cached photos and messages, not looking at the vulgar images. I'd already burned them into my memory. "Oh, Jenna, you should know better than to sext on a shared family cloud account." Her face drained of color as the truth landed. Eyes wide with panic, she whipped her head toward Rex, but he was staring at his plate, grim and ashen. He knew there was no more defending this. Jenna recovered enough poise to give me a hard stare. "You're bluffing." I arched a challenging brow, thumbing the screen to display the first explicit image. "Am I?" She flinched as if struck, realizing her gambit had failed. But when she spoke again, her voice was thick with bitter resignation. "All right, Marlene, you've got us." Her expression turned flinty, accusing. "But if you show Max those pictures, it'll break his heart permanently. Is that what you really want?" I opened my mouth to respond, but she barreled on. "And even if he does leave me, do you think Rex is going to stick by your side after this?" "The company, the money, he controls all of it. You'll be left with nothing." A heavy silence fell over the table. I hated to admit it, but the bitch had a point. Still, I refused to be intimidated by her thinly veiled threats. "Are you trying to cut a deal here?" I asked with a humorless laugh. She lifted her chin defiantly. "Just stating the facts. If you want to burn everything to the ground, be my guest. But I'd advise finding a different way to get your revenge." Disgust churned in my gut at her callous audacity. But as much as it galled me, her logic was sound. If I showed Max now, they'd turn it around to make me the unstable one destroying the family. No, if I wanted to truly make them pay, I needed to bide my time. Gather more evidence, more ammunition to ensure their utter downfall when I finally made my move. I locked eyes with Jenna, my expression steely. "You're right, for now I'll play along in your little facade." A feral smile stretched my lips. But this isn't over, not by a long shot. The next few weeks were a calculated war of silence and subtle sabotage. Anytime Rex and Jenna were together, I made sure to be a lurking, silent presence, a constant reminder that I was on to their twisted games. Jenna tried to keep up her sugary sweet facade around Max, but I saw the cracks. The way her smile became just a little too forced when I entered a room. How her eyes would flit to me with thinly veiled apprehension before remembering herself. Good. Let the snake fret, never knowing when I'd choose to strike. As for Rex, he could barely meet my gaze these days. The bright confidence that first drew me to him was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a diffident, shameful demeanor. Part of me relished seeing the arrogant prick broken down like this. Still, the pitiful display only fueled the flames of my fury. He didn't deserve the mercy of wallowing in guilt and remorse, not after the depth of his betrayal. No, for them I needed to enact a punishment befitting the crime. And to do that, I needed undeniable ammunition, more proof of their sordid misdeeds to detonate their twisted facade once and for all. That's when the idea struck me. Use their own technology against them. Rex's company had rolled out an innovative home security system, sensors disguised as common household objects, to monitor everything from motion and temperature to audio recordings. The smart software could detect irregular activity and automatically record video or audio files. At first, I cringed at the idea of spying on my own family, but after picturing Jenna's smug grin, her thinly veiled threats and false platitudes, my reservations melted away. They had brought this on themselves with their depraved actions. That weekend, I activated the discrete recording devices and positioned them meticulously around the house. Once set up, all I had to do was wait for them to inevitably slip up. And I knew they would. Cheaters and liars always grew complacent and careless eventually. Sure enough, the bugs soon paid off in spades. I'll never forget that night, sitting alone at the kitchen island while Rex and Jenna carried on in the living room, oblivious. Through the baby monitor setting, I heard everything. The soft clink of ice in a glass, a low feminine giggle, hushed whispers rife with heated innuendo. My fists clenched as sugary endearments and filthy nothings polluted my ears. This was what I'd been waiting for, cold, hard proof of their indiscretions, to shove in their smug faces. And yet, sickeningly, the more I heard, the more I realized they simply didn't care. Not about me, about Max and our family, or facing any consequences. It was all just a game to them, driven by their selfish cravings. Something inside me shifted at that moment, like a switch being flicked. Gone were any lingering traces of sadness or hurt, replaced by an icy, single-minded determination. I would burn them both to the fucking ground. From that day on, I changed my tactics. Instead of constantly monitoring their tryst like an overbearing warden, I receded into the background, giving them just enough leash to hang themselves with. Whenever they rendezvoused, thinking themselves cleverly discreet, I was always there, invisible eyes and ears soaking up every lurid, damning detail. Files upon files of incriminating evidence piled up, sitting angel of vengeance waiting to dole out its divine justice. More time passed. The longer Jenna and Rex went unchallenged, inevitably they grew emboldened, sloppy. Their indiscretions escalated from lingering looks and innuendos to more and more brazen physical acts. Each offense was meticulously documented. With each new video or audio clip, the noose of hard proof tightened inexorably around their necks. Never once suspecting that with their every arrogant violation, they were only digging their graves deeper. At last, when I'd compiled an unimpeachable dossier of their sins, as damning as it was comprehensive, I allowed myself a thin, vicious smile. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. Now, it was time for the grand unveiling, and to finally make these two depraved snakes reap their rightful karma. With my unassailable trove of evidence secured, I shifted to the next phase, ensuring their downfall would be complete and utter when I finally dropped the hammer. I started small, setting the stage with subtle moves calculated to destabilize Rex and Jenna's lives and erode their senses of control. Nothing too overt that would tip my hand, but seemingly innocuous disruptions that planted the seeds of anxiety and distrust. First was isolating Rex financially. Over the years, his success had made him increasingly lax in handling the household finances. He just signed whatever I put in front of him, leaving me to actually manage our money, investments, accounts, everything. This blind trust in me proved quite useful. With a few deft keystrokes, I liquidated our long-term assets and siphoned the funds into a new private account under my name. Tedious paperwork, sure, but the sheer scope of assets I methodically bled from Rex's holdings would leave him destitute once revealed. I even went so far as to contact our lawyers and update our wills, citing a routine financial review. More paperwork for Rex to simply sign off on without a second thought. All the while, he remained utterly clueless to the way I was stripping away his wealth, influence, and power piece by piece, dismantling the very foundations that made him such an arrogant, self-assured prick. The financial sabotage was going perfectly, but what to do about Jenna? She required a more personal touch to shatter her delusional sense of control. And it had to be precise, surgical even, to weaken her without rousing suspicion. Fortunately, I had just the right tools at my disposal. You see, the home sensors I'd used to document their affair were part of a much larger integrated smart home system, one that allowed remote operation of the thermostat, lighting, TV, and even individual kitchen appliances. Not convenient, but a virtual spiderweb spanning the entire house. At first, I used this capability simply to monitor their indiscretions undetected. But why stop there? Why not weaponize this power for some judicious, localized torment? So that's what I did. It started small, flickering lights when Jenna entered a room, or abrupt temperature fluctuations while she was working. A whisper of unsettling ambience just present enough to fray her nerves without identifying the cause. Before long, her seemingly random unease escalated into palpable jitteriness. Darting glances over her shoulder whenever she was alone, reflexively clutching her arms against a phantom chill, double-checking that the oven was off or the TV remote wasn't missing. Each time her mounting paranoia surfaced, I allowed myself a vindictive little smile. Yes, let the deceitful bitch stew in her disquiet and sinking sense of control. Let it fester like an untreated wound. Meanwhile, as I covertly tormented Jenna through technological gaslighting, my preparations on a more personal front accelerated as well. I reopened all the private accounts and assets I'd frozen or closed over the years at Rex's advisement, reclaiming my legal identity and financial autonomy. I also began quietly consulting divorce lawyers and advice columns on dividing assets and extracting maximum damages from cheating spouses. Information was power, and I intended to wield that power like a scalpel to excise Rex from my life. Still, for all my discreet empire building, something kept niggling at the back of my mind, a persistent sense that I was still missing some crucial element or failsafe to guarantee their absolute ruination when the gauntlet finally dropped. Then I remembered Rex's one fatally arrogant blind spot, his ego. For years the self-important ass had blocked my access to his work computer under the laughable belief that I was technically inept, as if his little corporate sandbox was some impenetrable sanctum to shield his secrets. Well, his smugness was about to be his undoing. It took some doing, but I eventually remembered an old recovery password he used on all his devices, the same one he never bothered updating. With it, I gained full access not just to his emails, files, and records, but his entire company database. As the sheer profusion of corporate intel poured across my screen, I felt the tides inexorably shift in my favor. Yes, this was it, the ultimate safeguard, the finishing touch to my scheme. After obsessively combing through every last byte of that digital vault, I finally had everything required to detonate the lives of my disloyal husband and faithless snake of a daughter-in-law. Rex and Jenna thought they were calling the shots, secure in their arrogant duplicity. But in reality, theirs was a house of cards just waiting for the slightest breeze to come crashing down. And I was a goddamn tornado. After weeks of meticulous planning and covert preparation, the time had finally come to execute my grand reckoning. The scene was perfectly set, a lavish family gathering under the guise of celebrating Rex's latest corporate promotion. A more oblivious observer might have mistaken the occasion for a joyous affair. Laughter and well wishes flowed as freely as the champagne, while Rex basked in the admiring glow, doting Jenna hanging on his arm like a trophy wife. But I knew better than to be fooled by such niceties. This was merely the calm before the storm I was about to unleash. As dinner wrapped up and the guests migrated to the living area, I caught Rex's eye. He offered me a tentative smile that didn't reach his eyes before hastily looking away. Poor bastard knew this uneasy truce between us was living on borrowed time. Well, his time was up. Once the crowd was settled, I took the opportunity to quietly disappear and cue up my technological grand jury of evidence. A few taps on my tablet synced to the living room's media suite, readying a bespoke slideshow to unspool their sordid crimes. When I emerged and rejoined the assembled party, a surprised murmur rippled through the crowd. I stood in place, my expression impassive and unsmiling as I remotely triggered the flats commanding its undivided attention. Everyone, if I could have a moment, please, my voice rang clear over the sudden hush. There's something you all need to see. The first few frames were innocuous enough, simple photos from our family albums spanning holidays, vacations, get-togethers through the years. Nothing too out of the ordinary to rouse suspicion. Not yet, anyway. I watched in silent vindication as frame after frame marched on, the visuals growing increasingly lurid and indicting, incriminating screenshots of emails and text exchanges, followed by snippets of intimate recordings and tawdry videos. The atmosphere in the room quickly morphed from polite curiosity to a rising wave of shock and horror. Glasses hit the floor, clinking against dumbstruck silence and stifled gasps as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. Exactly according to plan. Rex looked like he was about to swallow his own tongue, fists clenched so hard the knuckles were white. Meanwhile, Jenna just stared vapidly at the screen, expressions slackening into hollow resignation as her entire world caved in around her. Beside them, Max went so pale I thought he might actually faint dead away. Any illusions he harbored about his perfect little family were withering by the second, incinerated in the kiln of my merciless exposure. Part of me felt a twinge of pity for the poor bastard, but I quickly shunted it aside. He'd thank me later for freeing him from these parasites. By the time the slideshow reached its climax, an exquisitely curated kaleidoscope of Rex and Jenna's most revolting indiscretions, the room had descended into utter pandemonium. Screams and recriminations filled the air as the assembled crowd turned on the disgraced couple with unbridled rage and disgust. With a detached flick of my fingers, I killed the display, plunging the room into silence as awful as the grave. All eyes rounded on me with a mixture of fury, revulsion, and desperate pleas to deny what they'd just witnessed. Good. Let them stew in their conflicted indignation. Because at that moment, all I felt was a bone-deep sense of satisfaction at bringing these two snakes' deceit into the harsh light of reckoning. This was vengeance, pure and undiluted. A trembling hand appeared in my periphery as Rex staggered forward, looking utterly diminished and pitiful. Marlene. His mouth worked soundlessly, struggling to form words as the tidal wave of disgrace crushed him. How could you do this to me, to our family? To my surprise, I felt a bizarre pang of pity for the broken shell of a man before me. This hollowed-out, beaten cur was a far cry from the arrogant prick I once knew and despised. He already looked half dead on the inside. But just as quickly as it flared, the wisp of sympathy was snuffed out, smothered by the all-consuming sense of righteous retribution driving me forward. I met Rex's pleading gaze with all the cold, remorseless contempt I could muster. Do? My voice sliced through the tension like a blade. I haven't done anything but show our so-called family the truth about the unfaithful snake they've been harboring. Striding forward, I turned and looked squarely at Jenna, taking grim satisfaction in her cowering terror. This is what happens to those who betray me and revel in their sins. My words rang with finality, hammering the first nails into their karmic judgment. It may have taken time, but your disgusting charade ends here. Jenna's mouth moved, but only a terrified squeak emerged. Pathetic. I fixed her with a withering glare of utter disdain before sweeping my eyes over the rest of the horrified crowd. And as for you all, I'm done being surrounded by lies and deception. Fire blazed behind my stare, so make your choices accordingly. In the aftermath of my explosive unveiling, the room plunged into utter chaos. Shouting and screaming erupted from all corners as the shock of Rex and Jenna's betrayal detonated like a grenade in the midst of our gathering. Through the haze of hysteria, I watched in cold satisfaction as the duplicitous pair shrank back under the weight of unbridled fury and disgust leveled at them. In that moment, they both looked utterly diminished and pitiful, sad, broken shells of the manipulative vipers I'd unmasked. No more feigned airs of superiority, no more posturing or hiding behind smug facades, just raw, naked humiliation laid bare before their horrified loved ones. I felt no pity whatsoever, only the ruthless vindication of justice served. As the tidal wave of rage threatened to crash down upon them, a sudden movement sliced through the madness. With an anguished bellow, Max erupted from his stupor and launched himself at Rex, eyes wild and fists swinging. "You lying son of a bitch!" His words were choked sobs as he rained blows upon his father. "My own wife?" Rex made no attempt to defend himself from the onslaught, merely cringing like a kicked dog as the punches connected solidly with his face and body. Blood soon trickled from his nose and split lip as Max repeatedly punished him with white-knuckled fury. The display was as pathetic as it was cathartic to witness. All the arrogance and entitlement beaten out of the unfaithful prick who had betrayed our entire family. Movement flickered in my periphery, accompanied by a shrill cry, "Maxwell, stop!" Jenna rushed forward to pull her husband off Rex, but Max shrugged her off with violent ease, nearly sending her sprawling. His rage was solely concentrated on his father's bloodied form. "Don't you dare touch me, you whore!" He spat with astonishing venom. "All these years, and you were sleeping with that piece of shit?" Jenna flinched as if struck, visibly wilting under the scalding heat of her husband's disgust and hatred. Humiliation and fear roiled across her expression as she found herself the despised target of the very same fury I had once endured. Serves the faithless bitch right. With one last savage shove, Max sent Rex crashing back to the carpet in a crumpled, wheezing heap. I tensed, readying myself to intervene if the violence escalated too far. But instead, Max simply rocked back on his heels and stared down at the broken man before him, chest heaving. For a long moment, their eyes locked. The black vortex of a son's love curdled into bottomless revulsion. Then, with an anguished growl, he whirled away and stalked across the room, arms folded over his chest like he might crack apart otherwise. The spell finally broke, and hissed whispers rippled through our stunned spectators. All eyes focused intently on Rex and Jenna, awaiting some excuse, some explanation for their depravity. But none came. Rex only cowered on the floor, curled in on himself like a shamed child, and Jenna, that shrew, openly gaped, as if still unable to fully process the reality demolishing her life. Pathetic. Simply pathetic. "How could you?" A raw, trembling voice cut through the palpable tension. Everyone followed the sound to a sobbing Mary, Jenna's own sister and my most dearest friend, who was now staring aghast at her disgraced flesh and blood. "Jesus, Jen, your own husband?" Jenna blinked slowly, opening and closing her mouth like a landed fish. But it seemed any pithy justifications she might attempt had fled in the wake of her shattered world, abandoned under the implacable weight of her sins. Hot tears streaked down Mary's face as she shook her head in disgust. I can't even look at you." With that, she turned and scurried from the room in a blind flight of misery and betrayal. Another casualty of Jenna's boundless selfishness and lack of morals. A heavy, damning silence followed as the harsh reality of Max's shattered marriage and our family's dissolution crashed over us all. Only the occasional sniffle or muffled sob marred the quiet as the crowd drifted apart into smaller knots, whispering shell-shocked judgments and recoiling from the disgraced. Through it all, Rex and Jenna remained adrift in their own private islands of despair and humiliation, finally reaping their well-earned rewards. Their lies, their betrayal, their arrogant delusions, all of it had finally caught up with the depraved fools, undone at last by their own shameless sins. As I watched the disgraced pair shrink further under the weight of righteous disgust directed at them, I felt a deep, settled sense of satisfaction take root. A cold, vicious triumph at orchestrating their flawless downfall and reclaiming my dignity. The scales were balanced. Karma had been served. I was free. In the weeks and months following my merciless unveiling, the shockwaves continued rippling through our fractured family. Rex and Jenna's affair, that seismic betrayal detonated into the harsh light, left an impact crater of devastation that couldn't be easily overcome. Not that either of those depraved snakes seemed capable of recovery to begin with. As the legalities of our divorce proceedings ground into motion, it became excruciatingly apparent how overpowered and checkmated Rex was in the wake of my preparations. The finances, assets, even those precious corporate assets he'd guarded like Gollum's trinkets, all of it systematically stripped away and redirected into safeguarding my future. That arrogant, conniving prick didn't see it coming until it was far too late. By the time the final paperwork came down, his cushy lifestyle and affluent identity had been dismantled and remanded to the void. He was well and truly ruined. A hollowed-out husk destined to spend his twilight years, destitute and shamed by his own callous misdeeds. Most would consider such cruel vengeance excessive, if not outright unethical. But they didn't endure the bone-deep pain of being so completely betrayed by the person they loved most in this world. Hadn't spent countless nights sobbing myself hollow after uncovering the sordid depths of their indiscretions and lack of remorse. No. Long before our divorce, Rex's cavalier infidelity had made him the living, breathing embodiment of the monster under the bed he'd inflicted on me through his actions. He'd willingly traded the sanctity of our marriage vows and family for his tawdry pleasures. So I took from him the only things his worthless hide truly valued: his wealth, status, and precious corporate legacy. An eye for an eye, a soul for the lifetime of damage he'd wrought through his weakness and selfishness. He brought his ruination upon himself. As for Jenna, the so-called love of his wretched life, well, she fared even worse in the aftermath. Her own husband Max washed his hands of her duplicity, severing their relationship with a vicious finality I'd never seen in him before. Poor girl didn't just lose her marriage, but her entire support system too. Mary, her sister and best friend, cut all ties after being blindsided by the ugly truth. And Jenna's parents, once so proud of their brightest daughter, they wouldn't even look at her during supervised visits with her nephew, their only grandchild. Each ostracization, each closed door in her face was a well-earned denial of any last vestiges of sympathy or compassion Jenna might have merited. Her sins had irrevocably alienated her from every person who'd once loved and supported her through life's difficulties. I suppose part of me should feel some inkling of pity for the scorned viper who so richly deserved her utter isolation and ruin. But I just couldn't muster it. That parasitic succubus brought her karmic recompense on herself through her faithlessness and haughty belief that she was untouchable. With each fresh glance of Jenna's haggard, haunted appearance at the periphery of town, I felt only a fierce sense of ruthless satisfaction, a roiling, visceral need to remind myself of my ultimate triumph. This was the path she chose for herself, the just reckoning of her unrepentant sins, no more, no less. So while the duplicitous vermin licked their wounds in disgrace and ruin, I slowly extricated myself from the withered remnants of our tainted family remnants. With my financial future secured and independence reclaimed, I set about crafting a new identity for myself, one free from the lies and baggage of the past. Slowly but surely, the darkness became light. A sturdy foundation started taking shape, built on more trustworthy, meaningful relationships, ones that couldn't be poisoned and undermined by the betrayal of selfish, petty people. Max was understandably shaken to his core, but as the wronged man in this tragedy, he found immense empathy and support from those who'd suffered alongside us. Together, with an unbreakable bond of solidarity, we began patiently clearing away the rubble to reconstruct mutual happiness. And as the months ticked by, the lingering embers of bitterness and fury gradually cooled and hardened into an impenetrable armor, an internal suit of fortified resilience that could never again be breached by such weakness and dishonor. Which was for the best, because my new chapter was just beginning. The story closes on a crisp spring evening over a year later. Birds chirping, warm breezes ushering in vibrant renewal. I'm hosting a small gathering at my new home with Max and his son, laughing freely and swapping stories over fresh lemonade. My favorite people, the ones who stood by me through all the darkness and despair, toast to a hard-fought new beginning, a future where the very concept of betrayal is an impossibility. And as the sun sets on my reborn life, I allow myself a rare, beatific smile. For out of the ashes of obliterated lies and shattered illusions, I've forged genuine happiness, a sturdier eternal truth, at long last, true peace. A victory snatched from the reviled, but mine alone to fully savor.